Story 1, he kind of fired himself. Hired as the president of a live entertainment company, the owner held a large welcome meeting in the enormous lobby. Breakfast was served and everything was provided. He was offered $1 million salary, which was easy. However, he never showed up and it became a running joke for years. Story 2. The school bus driver was seen talking on her cell phone while driving on her first day of the job after a month of training, with a bus full of children. Story 3. The boss hired a temporary employee. In the first 20 minutes, he emptied her candy jar, taking every single piece. He then asked to go to lunch at 10 a.m., and she told him not to come back. Story 4. The individual interviewed well and showed up on his first Monday at the office intoxicated. He was slurring his words and stumbling while attempting to use the coffee machine, spilling coffee all over the floor. Security escorted him out within the first hour. Story 5. She showed up in pajamas, and when she walked to the circulation desk, she wrinkled her nose and said she thought she wouldn't have to actually talk to people. The position was titled Circulation and Customer Service. Story 6. A new courier driver was hired. On his first day, he was handed paperwork to deliver to the nearest city, about 20 minutes away. He replied, "I don't drive in the city." That was the nature of the job, so he was quickly dismissed. Story 7. Refused to wear proper personal protective equipment. The supervisor told him to put it on. He outright refused, so they fired him. He didn't even make it to the first coffee break. If a person is that adamant about safety gear on their first day, it isn't a good sign. Story 8. A man returned from lunch in an impaired state, and soon we discovered his Instagram video where he was promoting the company and tagging us while using 3 different devices to smoke in his car at a gas station just a block away. This was brought to our attention shortly after it appeared in our social media manager's feed. Story 9. I started with an overnight locked-in stocking position at Toys R Us, which went absolutely crazy. One employee worked about a quarter of the shift, then started talking complete nonsense and disappeared entirely. We couldn't find him anywhere. We saw evidence he was still in the store, but we didn't see or hear him at all. After a couple of hours, he would suddenly leap into whatever aisle we were in and start shrieking, laughing manically, or throwing merchandise at us. Bizarrely, he attempted to show up the next day as if he were unaware of what had happened. The lead guy said this occurred frequently. Employees just couldn't handle being locked in a silent, empty store all night. Why do you think we were hiring 3 people at once for a 6-person crew? Story 10. I trained an employee at a large liquor store where I was a department manager. He was a nice guy, worked hard, and seemed engaged. I sent him home a little early since he was still in training. On his way out the door, he tried to sneak out a handle of vodka but was stopped by security. My only reaction was, "Really?" Story 11. The boss hired a new woman to assist in the office. On her first day, she arrived on time and quickly started helping out. At first, she seemed like a good hire, but then the police arrived and arrested her for placing her 2-year-old child in a cage at home that morning and leaving the child alone because she didn't want to pay for daycare. This situation gained significant attention. Regarding the daycare issue, it appears that this incident wasn't the first time she had done something similar. While it's understandable that she may not have been able to afford daycare, locking a child in a cage and leaving them alone is unacceptable. This incident, although not related to my previous post, occurred nearby. Story 12. On the first day, we had a new hire pawn his company issued laptop over the weekend. He came in after the weekend, claimed he left his laptop at home, and asked for another one. He was informed that this was not the procedure and was advised to go home to retrieve his computer. Then he went to the parking lot, broke one of his car windows, and returned saying the laptop was stolen from his vehicle. It was obvious that his car was parked directly in front of the manager's office window. He attempted to get me to support his story, but I had 2 issues. First, I didn't even know him, and second, the person he wanted me to deceive had witnessed him break his own window. Story 13. An archaeologist was working on a longhouse site where human remains were uncovered, with First Nations liaisons present. A new team member with no field experience mistakenly believed she was in a leadership position and an osteology expert. She advised others to bring any found bones to her. When someone presented raccoon bones, she incorrectly claimed they were human fetal bones and stated that First Nations traditionally buried babies within the walls of their longhouses. She was removed from the site before lunch. Story 14. We were in a difficult situation and desperately needed people. So my boss instructed me to lower my standards for the commercial driving job. I had disqualified several candidates, all for valid reasons in my opinion. I agreed to try, and he sent me a student from our driving school. The first 3 days are classroom training, and the last 2 days are for driving. This man showed up late and without his uniform, despite our purchasing one for him. I asked where his uniform was, and he said he left it at home. I suggested he have someone bring it during lunch and asked to see his driver's license. He replied that he also left that at home. I questioned how he could show up late on his first day without his uniform and license. He apologized and said he overslept. I fired him on the spot. He cursed at me and walked away. My boss began to reprimand me until I explained what happened. He stopped immediately. Story 15. In Dallas, I saw a new bartender get fired within an hour of starting training. A group of men paid their tab in cash. She said, "These men are from Spain. They don't tip," then pocketed $5 before giving them their change. She was asked to leave and not return. Story 16. He arrived at work intoxicated. Apparently, his father came by before his shift to celebrate his new job, which exemplifies poor role modeling. Story 17. I was working in production at a local television station when a new employee told the morning show meteorologist that his wife thought of him during intimate moments. The employee had only been there for about 2 hours before he was immediately shown the door. Story 18. Not day 1, day 5. I hired a woman who interviewed very well. Her job was administrative, taking calls and scheduling appointments, and creating a schedule for 17 salespeople. It was not very intense. She was in training with 2 different trainers alternating days. Day 1, all was fine. Day 2, just the normal feedback on how fast she was picking things up. Day 3, feedback indicated that the trainer thought the new employee was inappropriately touching herself at her desk. She questioned what she saw but wanted it documented. Day 4, feedback from the other trainer mirrored the first trainer's observations but insisted it had occurred. The new employee wore a skirt every day and was touching the desk, phones, logbook, pens, and doorknobs. Day 5, at lunchtime, the new employee went to lunch. Both trainers asked someone else to answer the phones while they came to report that, indeed, the new employee was engaging in inappropriate behavior at her desk during work hours and questioned why this was happening and why she couldn't do this at home. They looked it up and discovered that it can be an obsession for some people, and they did not want to work with her anymore. When the new employee returned from lunch, I caught her as she entered the building and said, "Can you please come into my office? I need to discuss something with you." Human Resources was already in my office. The new employee responded, "I know what this is about. I'll just quit." She left. We mailed her paycheck to her, sanitized the office, got a new chair for that desk, and never heard from her again. Story 19. It was the new hire's first day as an usher at the movie theater. I was training him when he suddenly vanished. He returned a few hours later, having watched an entire movie from beginning to end. His excuse was, "We were slow, and you said there wasn't much more to train on, and you said we can watch stuff on shift." He severely misunderstood my comments about having some free time when it was slow. There is more to cover, and we don't just watch a whole movie. If there isn't much to do and the right people are on shift, you can watch a few minutes here and there. As an usher, it's expected that if you're not seen, you're doing your job somewhere else, and we're on radio communication if needed. Story 20. A new driver at a trucking company backed a trailer into the terminal manager's new Mercedes on his first and last day. After delivering his last load for the day, a trainee stopped at a truck stop, came out with a case of beer, and attempted to re-enter the truck with the beer. It is a violation of federal regulations to have alcohol in a commercial vehicle, unless it is the cargo being transported as part of a manifested shipment. The trainer reported the incident to management, and the trainee was fired on the spot. Story 21. Not terribly exciting, but my only instance of one shift and done. I hired a young man to work in a small retail setting. I trained him and everything seemed promising. I then scheduled him to work with a trusted, reliable employee. After the shift, she informed me that he hadn't done any actual work during the entire time. Instead, he went to his car in the parking lot and, in full view of the other employee, thoroughly cleaned it out. He then returned to the store and took a nap. When I spoke to him about it, he didn't have an explanation. So that was that. Another case I witnessed involved a female employee who lasted a month. It was a call center job, which was not interesting at all. One day, she was walked off the job by multiple managers in the middle of the day, which was unusual. One of the managers later told me it was because they chose to monitor her at that moment, and she was having inappropriate conversations with a customer. I wanted more details. How did that even happen? But the manager wouldn't elaborate, as she was already not supposed to be telling me about it. Story 22. I was an unpaid intern at my mom's campsite for the summer to keep busy. Mom hired a new guy for a trial period, and since I knew how everything worked, I was told to shadow him for a few days. This is a small campsite, and it is primarily a family business. The conversation began, and immediately, the new guy focused on a worker who was just doing his job. He started criticizing him harshly while the worker was simply trimming the hedges and emptying the trash. They hadn't even been introduced yet. At the end of the day, I reported to my mom, with the new guy in tow. I shared every unsavory detail that came from him. The worker he criticized all day for no reason, that was my dad, my mom's husband. Mom told him his trial period was over and to leave her property and never return. Story 23. Guy was hired contingent on a background and credit check. On day 3, I received a call from Human Resources stating he was not eligible. The store manager who hired him instructed me to terminate his employment. I took him into the office and said, "Your checks came back negative, and you cannot work here." He started explaining that his record had been sealed and the forgery and theft convictions were supposed to be expunged. I replied, "No, you have bad credit." Fast forward 3 months. The company dropped the credit check requirement, so the store manager hired him again. 3 weeks later, they caught him stealing computers. Story 24. I worked at a takeout counter and was training the new employee. He constantly spilled food on his hands and fingers while filling containers. I decided the best way to clean it off was with his mouth and tongue in front of customers. Story 25. He pretended he didn't have 2 hit-and-run accidents in the employee parking lot by claiming he didn't own a car. He called a friend and planned to sneak his car keys out to the friend so it could be driven down the street for him to retrieve later. He apparently raised suspicion when he asked a few of his new coworkers if there was an exit to the building that couldn't be observed from the security desk. Story 26. It was technically the second day. I work in a steel foundry, and my boss hired a new employee last year. The first day was orientation, and I let this new employee and another attendee leave early to go to Red Wing and pick up some required, company-paid boots. The new employee showed up the next day wearing sneakers. He said he fell asleep and didn't make it to Red Wing. My boss informed him that he couldn't be on the plant floor in sneakers. It was 7 a.m., so my boss told him to go home and, when Red Wing opened at 8:30, to get some boots and return. About noon, he still hadn't returned and wasn't answering his phone. My boss called Red Wing, and they said he hadn't been there. My boss instructed them not to give him boots if he showed up. An hour later, he called my boss saying Red Wing wouldn't give him any boots. When my boss asked why he didn't go at 8:30 like he was told, he repeated the same excuse about falling asleep. He was upset, claiming that nobody would give him a chance. My boss told him he wasn't wasting any more time on him. He had been given a chance and blew it because he couldn't be bothered to pick up free work boots. Story 27. An executive at my company showed up on his first day, not counting orientation, under the influence of opiates and had a concealed handgun that he did not conceal well. He did not make it past 11 a.m. Story 28. A little more than a week, but using a press to install a component on a circuit board was just smashing them. When told he had to go easier so he wouldn't break them, he said, "That's the way I do it." Well, I guess you can go do it your way somewhere else. Story 29. I started on the same day as another woman. At one point, I began sharing a few bad dad jokes to break the ice. She then said, "Oh, I've got one," and proceeded to tell some of the most racist jokes I have ever heard. She went to lunch and never came back. Story 30. I worked in a small chain retail pharmacy in high school in the 1990s. A student from another school got hired and spent the first 3 hours of his shift telling anyone who would listen that he didn't need the job and only got it to steal cologne and cigarettes. We were a close-knit group, and this person was difficult to work with, so someone informed the manager, who conducted a random bag check on all of us at closing time. He found 6 bottles of Fahrenheit and 3 cartons of Parliaments in his backpack. He was fired on the spot. The best part is that his mother came in the next day, yelling at the manager because her son told her he got fired because the manager said he didn't like Indians. Story 31. He made it through the workday fine. Then we had a welcome party for him after work, where he got completely drunk. He walked up to our chief executive officer and started yelling incoherently at him while poking him in the chest with his finger. The CEO gently pushed him back, asking him to stay out of his personal space, but the intoxicated man staggered backwards until he hit a wall and passed out. He was terminated before he woke up. Story 32. Nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing. He was just sitting there doing nothing for about 4 hours while everyone else was working hard. Story 33. He decided to see what would happen if he put a Dicam paint marker into a bearing press. Management disapproved of that. Story 34. The new security guard fell asleep in various locations around the school throughout his first day. He was fired around 3 p.m. when the principal found him asleep in the front lobby. A few people have mentioned that he may have narcolepsy. To correct a misconception about narcolepsy, it is not an excuse to fall asleep all day and then claim discrimination when you get fired. I have narcolepsy. I also receive treatment for my condition and am able to work a full-time job without falling asleep during the day. I have made my disability known to my employer and completed all necessary paperwork to obtain reasonable accommodations through the Americans with Disabilities Act. If he has narcolepsy, he needs to see a doctor. Story 35. She took a phone call while on the floor and continued the conversation for an hour while still working. We were surprised because she helped customers and kept working, saying, "Oh, hold on," during her phone conversation. However, we cannot have someone do that, so she had to go. She was a good folder of shirts, though. Story 36. We hired an office manager. She was a 20-something college graduate, the daughter of one of our clients. She was professional in demeanor and seemed like a perfect fit. All she had to do was sit at the front desk, greet visitors, order office supplies, and perform various office tasks. It was essentially a receptionist role, but we aimed to give her a better title, opportunities to do other things, and the chance to grow into a better position. The first half of her first day went great. Later that afternoon, we found out she was offering to procure drugs to the staff. At the end of the day, we called her in and asked if she was indeed offering drugs, and she fully admitted it and apologized for not being more discreet. She genuinely thought we were upset about her lack of discretion, rather than the drug dealing. Story 37. He was training in a warehouse near some bubble wrap. He popped several shapes into the bubble wrap. When the supervisor returned, it was a disappointing conversation, and he was escorted out. Story 38. The person was asked to change a light bulb in the back and ended up taking down 3 cameras and bringing them home. Story 39. He lasted 1 day, went for drinks with the team and the manager. He commented about the manager's 16-year-old daughter and then just would not stop. Asking if she was single was the last straw. He did not make it to day 2. This man was 30 years old and worked in a network administrator position, earning $80,000 per year, which was decent money in 2014. Story 40. I drank during the welcome lunch after the boss questioned whether drinking at lunch was a good idea. A colleague responded that it was not a problem. Story 41. Working at a burger place outside of Pittsburgh, a woman who had applied for a job came in wondering why the manager was not there for the interview. I informed her that he had an emergency and needed to reschedule. I apologized, but she became upset with me, stating she needed a job and was eager to work. I understood her frustration, but when I excused myself to handle a situation with a customer, she reacted negatively. The manager hired her despite my concerns. On her first day, she began asking her coworkers for money. She then approached me and threatened me. She was immediately fired, less than an hour into her shift. Story 42. Not the first day, but the first month I was training this girl. Part of the job involves maintenance, and we both had to sign off on her training. She refused to sweep and also refused to learn how to grease the bearings. I completed the paperwork, and she stated, "I just got my nail extensions done and didn't want to ruin them." Without reviewing what I wrote or what the paperwork contained, she simply signed off on it. Her access card was terminated the next day, and she was left in the rain until security escorted her to human resources. Story 43. I work in software development. For new hires, the team takes them out, and the available directors join to make it a joyous experience. We walk to the local restaurant together, and the new hire starts happily bragging about bringing us 100% of his former employer's code, including application, development operations, and even from their secret of research and development area. Half of the faces are surprised, while the others shift from happy to serious. The director of engineering asks where the code is, and the new hire replies, "I just loaded it onto my local machine. I'll have it on the network once I know where to share it." The director then whispers something to a lead who heads back to the office. We order burgers and sit down. 30 minutes later, the director takes a phone call, listens, and hangs up. We walk back to the office casually, but the new hire is stopped at the door by security. He is informed he is being terminated, and his theft has been reported to his prior employer. The IT department boxes up everything and puts red seal tape on all the boxes. We are interviewed one by one. By the next morning, it's as if he never existed. I don't know if the other company pressed charges. Story 44. Working in a sheet metal shop in the 1990s, I stood at one of the workbenches, going over some blueprints with the owner while a new employee was present. The new employee had been on the clock for only about 2 hours. A woman came out of the office, mentioned something to the owner, and then returned to the office. The new employee remarked, "Did you see her?" The owner replied, "Yes, that's my wife. Let's go get your things." I never saw the new employee again. Story 45. A while ago, about 20 years, the person who showed up for work was absolutely not the person who was interviewed. I heard a couple of different stories about what had happened, either that they sent someone else to interview for them or that someone stood in their place because they were absent without leave. Both explanations seem far-fetched to me. I never got to the bottom of it and wasn't high enough in the company to learn the details. It was definitely strange. Story 46. I terminated an employee on their first day in my department. As the department head, I noticed the employee arrived 30 minutes late without calling to inform me of any issues. When I asked what had happened, the employee shrugged, sipped her travel mug of tea, and said, "I just couldn't get out of bed this morning." I dismissed her immediately. Story 47. I hired a new person and began training them for the job. We set the expectations for what was required during the interview, in which I participated. On the first day of training, the individual remarked that removing trash from a trash can was too much and that they would not be doing that. This remark seemed inappropriate, so I clarified that everyone takes out the trash, which is part of the job description from clerk to manager. The individual looked me in the eye and stated that this was not what was promised during the interview, emphasizing that they would absolutely not take out the trash and that I could find someone else for that task. I expressed my appreciation for their honesty and informed them that they could go home, as this job would not be a good fit for them. They became upset and called my supervisor, who was also part of the interview and supported my decision. The new hire subsequently criticized our store on social media. Story 48. Temp wore dress shoes to a demolition site. Steel-toed boots are a requirement. He didn't even get through orientation and was sent home 20 minutes after he arrived. Story 49. I was working in a new restaurant, and it was day one where we were going over the menu and wines. We were supposed to show up at 10 a.m. We were all around a table when a guy walked in. The manager stood up, greeted the guy, and to my horror, it was my stalker's brother. The manager walked him out of the room, came back, and told us he had fired him because he was late. I felt so relieved and also a little dumbfounded by how random the world can be. I was afraid that I would have to work with someone who might tell my stalker where I was. I had already changed jobs and moved, and the issue was resolved in an instant. It was the weirdest feeling to be both scared and relieved at the same time. Story 50. A minor safety violation occurred 15 minutes after starting. The foreman pointed it out, and I told him that nobody tells me how to do my job, which led him to storm off. Management expressed frustration as they were struggling to recruit new staff. Story 51. I was a foreman on a residential framing crew. A new guy showed up 15 minutes late, stood by his car, and had a snack and a drink. Then he started slowly walking over to the home we were building. When he finally arrived, I told him, "Just get back in your car. We can't use you." There was no way we were going to carry someone who was not contributing to our crew. We took pride in our work. He didn't even make it onto the payroll. Story 52. A young man started in a junior marketing role in the office as part of my team. He was seated at a desk directly in front of the IT department, which had a clear view of his monitor. Within 30 minutes of his induction, one of the IT staff called me over and said, "Look at this." The new hire had opened File Explorer and was trying to navigate the contents of shared drives and servers on the company network. We pulled him to one side and asked him what he thought he was doing, warning him that attempting to explore the systems on his first day was probably not the ideal start. He apologized and promised not to do it again. After he left the room, the IT staff member and I went back to his desk. And I am not exaggerating when I say that, right before our eyes, this young man immediately opened the registry and started attempting to access security settings. It was 2 minutes between the first warning and his termination. It is seldom a good idea to engage with people who respond with, "Well, actually," but I am going to clarify a few things in the hope they might stop replying. I was not the IT staff member. The IT staff member was the IT staff member. You can be sure I did not have expertise in security systems or access rights. Did the new employee actually access anything as opposed to just trying? I have no idea. Please refer to the previous statement. Yes, it probably was a terrible system setup. This was over 20 years ago. It was the worst environment in which I have ever worked. Nothing was done properly, and nothing worked. I did not stay long. Perhaps the IT staff member should have been let go as well. It might well have been a failing on his part, but I cannot speak to that. I was not the IT professional. Should the new employee have been terminated at all? You would need to ask the human resources manager who made the decision based on what the IT staff member reported. I was there in my capacity as the new hire supervisor to witness the termination. Story 53. I was a warehouse supervisor. The owner brought in a new forklift driver on Monday. I asked if he was certified and was told not to worry about it. We started loading deliveries, and I put my best spotter and inventory person with the new hire. During the first load, he clipped a post. I gave him a verbal warning, which is standard, and took his spotter aside. The spotter told me the driver was ignoring instructions. I took the driver aside and told him he needed to listen to his spotter or I would assign him to a dolly. Less than an hour later, I was standing by the office door talking to my scheduler when I heard, "No, stop, stop," and "oh," followed by a crunch. The driver backed into a wall. I walked over, told him to get off the forklift, handed him a dolly, and assigned him to a stocking team. I went into my office to complete a damage report and a formal write-up when I heard yelling and a loud bang. I went back out onto the dock and saw the new driver arguing with 4 people while one of my forklifts was on its side in the parking lot. The driver had gotten back on a forklift as soon as my back was turned and drove it off the dock. Fortunately, at a spot where the dock was only about a foot off the ground. I took him to my office and told him to sit down. I called the owner and informed him that I was firing his new hire with do not return. The owner tried to argue with me until I explained the costs of the damages. The new driver was escorted off the property by 2 of my semi-professional football players who worked for me. I never found out who that individual was related to. There was no way he was certified or qualified for that job. Story 54. Sent the HR representative an inappropriate picture on Messenger after his first shift. Not sure if that counts as day one since he finished his shift, but there certainly wasn't a day two. Story 55. It was a cold and rainy day, so he put his work gloves in the break room microwave. They caught fire, so he took them out and threw them into the smoking area trash can, which also caught fire. He melted a section of the greenhouse wall in 30-degree Fahrenheit weather. Story 56. I got fired on day 2. I pointed out that the employee handbook stating that discussing wages is a fireable offense is illegal. 10 minutes later, I was told I was not a good fit and was escorted out. Story 57. I worked as a steward in the university for the student union event team. At the end of the year, we held an official ball and an unofficial campus party on our main campus. The nightclub was underground, but the party overflowed across the entire area above. I worked both nights, gaining cash experience while becoming familiar with leadership roles. On the first night, a new staff member arrived for his first shift inebriated. He was stumbling and spoke as if he were disoriented. I sent him home and informed him not to return. The next day, during the black tie event, he showed up for his second shift, completely unaware that he had been dismissed the night before. We had quite a laugh explaining the situation to him. Story 58. I was a sandwich artist at a Subway back when we were called sandwich artists. The store I had been working at closed, and I took whatever job I could find. I calculated how many hours I needed to work to make rent and have $250 for food and maybe a beer. It was on this last day that it happened. My shift was a closing one. I was scheduled until 10:45 p.m. My plan was to walk out and quit at 7. I did not feel bad, as the owner was a very condescending and overall unpleasant person. She had hired a new employee named Eddie. He was supposed to show up after the lunch shift for his first day of training. However, he was late. The owner called him and he answered. She asked where he was and he said he was at home. She told him he was supposed to be at the Subway. He said he forgot that it was today, but he'd be right in, as he lived just a few blocks away. 15 minutes later, Eddie walked in. He had long hair, dirty clothes, and flip-flops. But that was not what caught your attention. What you noticed was that his eyes were not just bloodshot. They appeared to be blood. The smell of marijuana was so strong on him that one could smell it when he opened the door before he stepped inside. The owner told him to go home, take a shower, and come back with proper shoes on. Eddie left. He returned a half hour later wearing shoes, yet somehow he smelled even more strongly of marijuana. It was overpowering and, above all, unappetizing. The owner sent him home and told him not to come back. He asked if he would be paid for the day, and that just made her angry. After that, I felt bad and couldn't bring myself to walk out on that shift, leaving her alone in the store. I finished my shift, told her I was quitting, and never went to that Subway again. Nor, not surprisingly, did I ever see Eddie again, though it's entirely possible that at times I had smelled him. Story 59. I was fired on my first day of a job because I asked why I was not allowed to have a chair while working on the assembly line. Many of the workers had chairs, and someone offered me one, so I took it. The supervisor informed me that I was not permitted to have a chair. When I inquired why, she said it was simply her decision. Later, she returned and fired me for questioning her authority. Story 60. They informed the supervisor, who had just hired them and was explaining how they wanted the job done, that he was mistaken. The new hire then proceeded to explain how they would complete the job. They were there for less than 2 hours. This job involved drafting plans. Story 61. Stole someone's phone while in the break room putting her belongings away to start her first shift, right below a security camera. Story 62. I asked the manager's daughter if she had slept with anyone to get the position she was in, and then mentioned that if he were her supervisor, he would help her get promoted. I'm sure you could hear a pin drop in that lunchroom. We didn't even know his name, but he never came back from lunch. Story 63. The best answer I found to this was on Reddit, and I have never seen it again. A young girl was on her first shift as a waitress when customers ordered a bottle of champagne. She brought it out while shaking it and proceeded to perform a celebration, spraying it over everyone while cheering in excitement. That was the only context she had for champagne, so she didn't know it was only for big celebrations. Story 64. Worked at a full-service gas station where the employee pretended that customers ran over his foot multiple times. It wasn't great for upsetting customers before they made a purchase. Story 65. We build pipelines that require highly skilled welding. We had a worker, Makita Cap, who compromised the quality of his finished product. This was a significant issue because it can affect the integrity of the pipe and cast doubt on everything we produce. He was fired within his first 6 hours. Story 66. I've been a manager for over a decade in the same retail company, and I have had to terminate some employees over the years. When they are new, it usually involves excessive call-outs, an inability to perform basic tasks, or odd drama and outbursts. However, I once had to dismiss a girl on her first day for outright stealing a customer's credit card and then using it to order pizza to her home address with her real name. One of my long-term employees called me a few hours after this new employee's first shift to inform me that the owner of the stolen credit card came by the store to report that the new girl had taken her credit card, but the owner had retrieved it. The customer's card had gone missing after she visited our store and, a few hours later, an order was placed at a local pizza restaurant. After the card owner explained what happened, the staff at the restaurant gladly provided her with the address. Apparently, she went to this girl's home, demanded the card back, and the girl actually returned it. The cardholder's boyfriend mentioned that she usually gets aggressive and enjoys fighting, and he was surprised she didn't confront the new employee more harshly. Later, the customer came back to the store and informed us of everything. We offered the customer a gift card on the house to make amends. She wasn't really upset, just wanted us to know and to ensure that the new hire was fired. I called this new employee and confronted her, and she started sobbing on the phone, confessing through her tears and rambling about her issues. My favorite excuse was, "I thought it was a gift card." I responded, "Yeah, but you're not going to work here anymore." Later, when I reviewed our security footage, I saw her swipe the card without a second thought when I turned away for just a moment. The strangest part was that she continued to come by our store frequently as if we were still on good terms. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.